Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
Evan always misses episodes where we have the most fun because the juxtaposition of me going over our show notes here for about 15, 20 minutes and you just watching the new Twisters trailer on repeat saying, Ryan, I am seeing this on opening night. I'm getting in line and then thinking, oh, wait, no, there's not going to be a line because no one else is going to buy tickets for this.
Yeah, you're leaving out the important part of the context of me watching this trailer. This looks awful. This looks stupid as hell. Oh my God, is this dumb? I'm all in.
If you want a little behind the scenes of what goes into a making of the Winged Wheel podcast, that was a good little representation of how these episodes usually get prepared.
You just interrupting the Twisters trailer with, what do you think about Michael Brandsegg-Nygard? I pop up with a 10-second answer of like, yep, big fan. Back to the trailer.
Okay, even funnier than that though. And I've never once had an inclination to ever stop doing this podcast. We love doing this show. Trust us. Like, we wouldn't be doing the show if we didn't love it for the amount of work that goes in. We love talking about the Detroit Red Wings. We love talking about hockey. But if we were ever going to put this show on pause, it would be to do a 12-episode miniseries on Jacob Trouba's missed hit and subsequent crashing into the boards like Wile E. Coyote. That is the funniest thing I've seen in a hockey game in a long time, and I'm ashamed to admit how many times I watched that clip. It was such a heinous hit attempt. It's funny.
I love my kids, but I almost put the still image of it as the background on my phone.
It was so good, man.
Like, in the history of iconic hockey photos, it's Trouba supermaning into the boards, Bobby Orr, a big gap, and then everything else.
I saw a Rangers fan saying, that is by far the most indefensible hit attempt I have ever seen, and I'm a Rangers fan who watches Jacob Trouba 82 games a year.
Nietzsche's quote made it even better. He's like, what do you think he was trying to do? I don't know. Elbow me in the head. Only he knows. We know what type of player he is.
And then you don't even know if this part was intentional, but the kick to the head on the way down.
No. Playoff hockey is so graceful.
It is people watch that sport. That's how you know when people who have no idea what hockey is, they'll watch that clip specifically and be like, wait, that's okay? He just tried to kill a guy. And the answer is actually no. By the rules, no. But it's all kind of within this stupid little sphere of this game that we watch and live in. We're like, yeah, that's just true. But he does stuff like that from time to time.
I love the discourse around whether or not Nietzsche bailed out on purpose. I don't care. Equal option is funny to me. I don't know which one's funnier. The fact that he accidentally fell and it sent Trouba in there. So the confluence of events that led to this iconic moment, or the fact that he saw him coming and just went, no, and then just drops.
Anyone who's played, like I've had a guy who used to duck into your knees on any like normal hit attempt. And when you do, there's a certain way you can do it where it's just really scummy. It's scummy and you're going to get yourself slashed or someone's going to hit you from behind because that's just the way. You don't do that. But then you do what Nate did, which is, you're like, well, I'd rather not be the target of a cruise missile today, so I'm going to preserve my own life. It was like, for anyone who played the old Call of Duty games, it was like one of those Predator missiles you used to call in when you got, like, what was it, 5-kill streak for one of those? It's like a homing missile with his elbow. Anyhow, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, the Stanley Cup playoffs, and all the shenanigans that come along with it, and lots more. Prospects, big prospect talk this episode. I am one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And Evan has been the target of a previous Jacob Trouba elbow, so he is out of this episode. On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we are going to be discussing some Red Wings news, 2 contracts for Red Wings prospects, one of them exciting and one of them maybe a little bit concerning for Red Wings fans as we discuss Axel Sandin Pellikka as well as Dmitri Buchelnikov and their respective contracts, one in the NHL and one in Russia. We're going to be talking about the Grand Rapids Griffins and their success, as well as Red Wings overseas in the World Championships, prospects like Nate Danielson, and Portland's success as they move on in the WHL. The Draft Lottery. The NHL can't do anything without a little bit of unnecessary and stupid drama, as they continue to be the most bush league of the major sports leagues. In the end, it's just funny, but it is a little bit embarrassing.
Welcome to the NHL, Utah. Get used to it.
And then we'll be discussing prospects based on where Detroit is picking. Spoiler, nothing big happened. If something big happened, you would have had an episode last night.
Spoiler, literally nothing happened.
Yes. Chalk.
Nothing happened.
We'll be talking about players in Detroit's range at 15th overall. Other prospect lists as Bob McKenzie did his, first big list as we approach the draft here and more before we get into NHL news, playoffs, and whatever else we have time for before overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that this podcast is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. It does mean a lot to us. It's how we kind of keep the lights on and continue to do the show during the off season. You allow us to do things like produce this show, continue to make it bigger and better. You allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation. You allow us to run events partnered with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. You allow us to produce shows like Expected by Whom, hosted by Prashant Iyer and Sean Shapiro. All of that and lots more. And if you become a patron, you get access to some really great benefits like our overtime bonus episodes, which record right after these main ones. If you like the Twister conversation at the start of the show, it's just that for like 20, 30 minutes. It's a lot of fun. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord community as well. You're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, this past season and the season prior, we gave away 2 tickets to every Red Wings home game. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast.
And I will mention one of the July Patreon exclusive episodes is going to be my 30-minute breakdown of Twisters.
Oh, that's a promise. Yeah, that's absolutely happening now.
I wasn't giving you the choice. It's happening. I am going to go see that movie in all of its awful glory, and I'm going to have opinions.
You know what's going to happen, right? You're going to come in. I'm going to have the studio set up for you. I'll have whatever snacks you want and everything. Maybe I'll bring in one of the dogs to be your producer. Evan and I are going to go golf because we're going to be useless. We're not needed. So it's going to be you, the camera, the mic, and that's it.
So you remember a Night In with Ryan Hanna?
Yeah.
That's going to be where you review serious movies. A Night In with Brad Crisco. It's going to be a Night Out with Brad Crisco, where we are going to watch the dumbest movies imaginable.
Mel, why is all the tequila in the house gone? Okay. The Red Wings. Axel Sandin Pellikka. Probably for a lot of people, the most exciting Red Wings prospect, or at least tied for the most exciting Red Wings prospect that hasn't seen the winged wheel in a regular season game yet, has signed his 3-year entry-level contract with the Detroit Red Wings. And right away, people thought, oh, is this him coming over? Because, they signed the ELC. Why do it now? It wasn't long after where he confirmed that, nope, the plan is to stay in Sweden for another year. But still, Detroit gets a little bit more control over the process. They get a little bit more, say in his development, where he is, that kind of thing, by signing him. There's also different stipulations when a player signs an ELC. You often get a little bit of a deposit into your account as you get those little bonuses and things like that. All of that is, those finer details are determined contract to contract within certain boundaries. But still, he is signed. His ELC is here. It is eligible to slide, but Axel Sandin Pellikka, it was this like half, he's a Red Wing now officially, and the plan hasn't changed. He's going to stay in Sweden. So explain that, and what do you make of the thought to keep him in Sweden for another year?
Well, yeah, he signs the contract now, which means he gets a signing bonus now, which means he can afford some movie tickets for next month.
Brad was swallowing.
So, in reality, the actual signing of the LC right now, outside of some minor bits of control, mean nothing because they can defer it a year and he can still play in Sweden. I personally would have preferred to see him come over to Grand Rapids this year just to adapt, but that opinion can be easily swayed depending on where you think he is in his development. I personally think this whole smaller defenseman needs more time is a little overblown with him specifically because he's not one of these undersized defensemen that's a black hole defensively. He can hang. He can hold his own. Don't get me wrong. It's not his calling card, but he's not Erik Karlsson over there. He can hang with the big boys. That being said, I'm perfectly okay with him hanging around Nick Lidstrom and Nick Kronwall for an extra year, building his confidence a little more. I know he battled injuries a bit this year, so he didn't really get the full grind of it, if you want to call it that. So if the plan is likely one more year in Sweden, let him be comfortable, let him develop a little more, let him work on his strengths a little more, and then come over, spend a year in Grand Rapids, adapt to the North American game, see how that goes, and then Detroit the year after that. Sure, he's still playing top-level professional hockey. Would I have liked him to have learned a little more of the nuances of the North American game? Sure. Catch up to the pace of the small A's, the more physical nature of it, whatever. Sure. Is it a huge deal that he's not this year? Not really.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You definitely see the arguments going both ways. I will say that something that does inspire confidence for me, though, is if they're making that decision, that's coming from the camp in Sweden. That's Kronwall, Lidstrom when he's over there, Håkan Andersson, and they've done well with the defensemen who have played over in Sweden so far. Edvinsson has not been the most straightforward prospect development in terms of, like, he wasn't a ready-made prospect when they drafted him. He's had to work on things, and he's still working on things. But the result of Edvinsson we have now is a really good result in the range of what was possible in terms of a player of his archetype at the time of drafting. Like, there could have been a guy who never learned really how to dish the puck out sooner, or never learned how to play with a little bit more pace, or execute those decisions a little bit quicker. So if they're saying he needs more time, then I tend to trust that based on Detroit's success in that regard with the team in Sweden. So that makes sense. I do agree, though. I think talented players find a way to adapt, and as long as it's not like, Michael Rasmussen to the NHL 2-3 years too early, which is what the Red Wings had to do when they first brought him up, and that can stunt your development as a player. Players can flex and adapt a little bit more than what they've gotten credit for. So I think if they did make the decision to bring him over, it would be just fine. But if they want him to go over there and work on things beyond just being like really proficient on the power play, work on your 5-on-5 play, work on whatever physical or 5-on-5 defense or whatever it is aspect of your game, then that's fine. Was he going to be on the Red Wings next season? Probably not. I think, maybe an outside chance had he played the full year and stayed healthy. I thought at points that his development was kind of going that direction where he could have challenged, but it would have been a surprise if he made the team. So in all, I don't see any kind of cause for concern. It is, let's call it for what it is, though, less fun. It would have been cool to see him here sooner. The Red Wings do have a right D problem behind Mo Seider. He wouldn't have been the answer next year. Like, when you ask people who should they bring in, you're going to see Tanev's name more than, Axel Sandin Pellikka in terms of who's viable to fill that spot. But you do want to see him there sooner rather than later.
Well, looks like 2 more years is the likely plan now, because I have a hard time seeing him jumping from the big ice in Europe straight to the NHL.
Maybe.
It's possible, and he's so talented, I'm not ruling it out, but I feel like there will be an adjustment period.
We've also almost lost a little bit of the concept of a guy splitting time between the AHL and the NHL over the course of a year, right? Like,
yeah.
What if he comes in and he's a third pair right D, and sometimes he's great and he needs some time in the Grand Rapids system, and then he comes back and he plays like 35 games in the NHL or whatever it is? That's perfectly possible. We've just been exposed to like the all of Mo Seider or the nothing of Simon Edvinsson in the past couple of years.
And we saw the yo-yoing of Dennis Cholowski, so I'd like to avoid that.
Yes, I hope we don't draw comparisons between Axel Sandin Pellikka and Dennis Cholowski.
Very different players, very different skill sets. Not worried about that, but if to your point, you're talking about a half a year in Grand Rapids and then you call him up at New Year's, hypothetically, sure, very much on the table. I just don't like the up and down constantly for prospects.
And for folks who haven't followed Axel Sandin Pellikka, or let's say you're newer to the podcast and you're not completely aware of the kind of player he is, give us a little bit of a rundown of Axel Sandin Pellikka's game, what kind of player he is, and how he'd fit into the Red Wings system.
Well, he's a combination of Erik Karlsson and Nick Lidstrom, going to challenge for some of Bobby Orr's records. In reality, he's a very, very gifted offensive defenseman. He's sub 6 foot. He's not tiny, but he's sub 6 foot. A competent defender who can absolutely run a lethal power play and can hang at 5-on-5. His stats this year in Sweden, he was a bit of a power play merchant, but he was also 18 in one of the top leagues in the world. So that's perfectly acceptable. He was the top defenseman at, I think, multiple junior international tournaments, was a go-to player for Sweden at the World Juniors, and that was his second year at the World Juniors, I'm pretty sure as well. So he played as an underager, just one of the best players for his age group, especially in Sweden. Like, he's been captains of their team. So he's got everything you want for the role that he's likely to fill. It's just, are the shortcomings going to prevent him from being elite? Or are the strengths so good that he'll be undeniable at the next level?
For me, he was the most exciting pick Detroit could have made at that spot. And I know we talked a lot going into that draft of, if you walk away with these two picks, with Detroit's two picks that they had, at points we were thinking, oh, Sandin Pellikka with the first pick, and then Danielson would actually be a great result for the second pick. He just wouldn't fall that far. And then I remember that day I said, I feel like this feels like a Danielson pick for the Red Wings first pick in the first round, 9th overall. And that's what they did. And I never would have thought that Axel Sandin Pellikka would have fallen as far as he did, but Detroit walked away with him too. So in terms of excitement, like, his talent is extremely high. I'm big on what the Red Wings did by bringing him in. If you hear offensive defenseman, you think, oh, what if he can't defend? Look, man, the Red Wings need to continue to add offensive talent, and he's the kind of player who, and like, don't pigeonhole him in that that's all he can do, but he's the kind of player who can bring that kind of excitement from the blue line, and it can't just be Mo Seider on the top pair on the right side. It can't. Detroit needs more than that to succeed.
No. Is he going to be Quinn Hughes or Cale Makar? Probably not. It's not zero. The possibility is there, but is he going to be them? Probably not. Adam Fox, Chris Letang? Lot of similarities there. So the ceiling is very high. Very, very high.
Well earned by Axel Sandin Pellikka to get his entry-level contract. The slide will be a factor in there as well, so the contract won't kick off until, a year later. Detroit has that option, but nevertheless, he's signed. Exciting for Red Wings fans. It's a small step, but a step nevertheless. Another contract that's notable for Red Wings fans, Dmitri Buchelnikov, a recent second-round draft pick who kind of came out of nowhere for Red Wings fans, but someone who's buried in the Russian system and all the obscurity behind that curtain, no pun intended. Super talented forward, kind of a seen as a potential offensive dynamo, all things goes well, but wasn't going to be able to arrive until 2025, 2026 to North America earliest, based on his contracts over in Russia. He recently signed a new 2-year contract with SKA in the KHL, which would mean that potentially, and this is a big asterisk because when it comes to the KHL and Russian contracts, it gets a little fuzzy and it gets a little dicey and it gets a little tentative. We never really know the details, but he could arrive, if you follow those 2 years, for the 2026-2027 season at earliest. So 24-25 and 25-26, he'll be in the KHL. That's a year later than we originally thought, and probably a little bit disappointing for Red Wings fans to hear, but I really want to push and say, you don't really know the details of those contracts, what kind of out clauses he has. You often see teams letting players go. You often see teams hanging on to players and coercing them into signing longer contracts. But regardless, if you're going to take it for what it is right now, it's not the best news to get Buchelnikov in Detroit any earlier, provided he does pan out as a prospect. He is a 2003 birthday, so he's going to be 21 as of September 6th. So he'll be 23 years old. Is that the end of the world? No, but it's certainly not advantageous.
He's an undersized, one-dimensional forward who is about a half a point per game in the KHL this year. He was not going to be NHL ready before this. Again, like Sandin Pellikka, would it have been nice to maybe get that extra year in Grand Rapids? Sure. But again, playing in arguably the next best league in the world, he's going to be developing exactly how Detroit wants and how they want him to develop. Maybe, maybe not. That sucks. You get a little bit less control, but I got to remind everybody, this guy's a long shot still. This guy is far from a certainty to be an NHL player, let alone an impact NHL player. The toolkit is absolutely there, but he's a late second round pick. Take that for what it is. And he was a bit of a reach at the time in the late second round. Great prospect, great toolkit. This was the time frame he was going to need anyway.
Yeah, that's the way I think about it too. Like, it's easy to get doom and gloom about it, but for what reason? Like, if he comes over when he comes over based on this contract, I think you're right, Brad. Like, what's the difference? Okay, he didn't play in Grand Rapids. Okay, well, the KHL it's about as good as you can ask for. Maybe the SHL if you want to split hairs here, but it's also two different styles of league. Keeps him more comfortable too. Whatever you want to make of rumors of players wanting to come over, not wanting to come over. We've seen so much insane misinformation. You never know what's actually being reported. You never know what's, being driven by the teams or the KHL itself to drive the narrative. There's a big geopolitical influence on this. We all know how much Vladimir Putin loves hockey, and so that's going to be used as a political bargaining tool as well. The best kind of way to approach this is, yeah, you're right, Brad. Like, he's going to need that time to develop. If those issues are going to crop up, they were going to crop up anyways. But as of now, he's developing maybe a year or two longer than you'd like, but he's developing in a great league. And if he makes it, then he's going to be incredibly NHL ready by then.
Exactly. He's developing. That's what it comes down to. He's playing at a top level. You can nitpick the styles, which is perfectly justifiable. Again, my preference would be at least 1 year in Grand Rapids before when he's ultimately going to come over. Because, yeah, he'll be 23, 24 when he comes over. And at that point, is Grand Rapids going to be a great option for him? Probably not. But if at 23, 24 years old in the KHL, he isn't, we're not sitting here going, oh God, we need him in Detroit right now. Well, he's probably not going to make it anyway then. So again, splitting hairs over the development path, totally fair, but it is still just splitting hairs.
Okay. Those are a couple of contracts, one exciting, one a little tentative, but nevertheless about Red Wings prospects who could, both of them actually offensively talented prospects, who could factor in the future. Let's talk about the Red Wings system that's factoring in right now with the Grand Rapids Griffins. They are on fire. Like, for them to have taken that best of 5 series in 4 games is fantastic. For Jonatan Berggren to have scored all 3 game-winning goals is fantastic. You saw great performances across the board as the Grand Rapids Griffins advanced to the Central Division Finals for the first time since their 2017 Calder Cup run. They are going to play, I think it's either Milwaukee or Texas, and Texas is currently leading that series at the time of recording. So we'll see by the time you listen, you may know the result, but still fantastic result for the Griffins, and Dan Watson and that crew over there continue to roll on an incredibly impressive season.
Yeah, they ran through Rockford like a twister through a small Midwestern town.
I need Evan here to keep you in check. I can't do it on my own. I can't produce and edit the show, and you're left unchecked.
Do you know how bad these jokes are going to be if they end up playing Texas?
Oh my God.
They've yeed their last haw.
Brad.
Let me tell you.
Brad, please.
Let me tell you.
Talk about Sebastian Cossa, please.
He real good.
Yeah.
I was going to throw out another one, but that would have been too much. It was a really tight series. 2 of the 3 wins came in overtime, so he had to be on his game at all times. It's not like Grand Rapids was running away with these games 7-1, but he did what he needed to do to keep them in these close games. I don't know if there was a game where you can say, oh, he's the only reason they won.
No.
But there were multiple games where he was a big reason they won and allowed the team in front of him to pull out those close wins.
Really, like, for them to have turned their season on, I don't want to say around, but they really turned it on around December, and to have continued on this, and for them to perform when they had Edvinsson, when they lost Edvinsson to the Red Wings for a while, when they lost Berggren for a small stretch, for Cossa to have emerged as this, solid backstop who they can count on consistently. And that's hard to do for a goalie to kind of take that spot and earn it and send your team on this Calder Cup run. The absolute best result you could have hoped for as a Red Wings fan or anyone in the Red Wings organization. And for Griffins fans, I mean, they deserve this. Grand Rapids is such a fantastic city, and that fan base is the best in the AHL. It's exciting to watch. And you're right that it's not just Berggren one night. It's not just Cossa one night. So many players are factoring into this. If you're looking at this purely from a Red Wings perspective, you can see why the last 2 episodes we're talking about, what's Detroit's future and how many of these guys are going to factor in. Because look what they're doing in the AHL right now.
There's a lot of them. Mazer had a big series.
Yep.
Kasper scored the empty net goal to seal the series, which tells you that Marco Kasper was on the ice in the final minute of a 1-goal game in a series-clinching game. So if you want to know what Dan Watson thinks of him.
Yeah. We'll see what their Central Division Finals series is and continue to root them on, but this is it's fun to get the extended look at Red Wings prospects. Previous years, Detroit would obviously miss the playoffs and we'd be talking in the offseason and we wouldn't have this to talk about. It'd be purely, upcoming NHL draft prospects because the Griffins weren't really doing much for a long time either on this front, or at least for a lot of that time. So thank you, Grand Rapids, as usual. Okay, we are going to jump into a quick break and then we'll be back afterwards. But first, we want to let you know that this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching a hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for the Red Wings, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer and great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. Welcome back. A couple quick updates for Red Wings players, prospects, etc., and other leagues. First of all, in the World Championship, very cool to see Trey, Augustine, and Alex Lyon team up for a performance, a win, as the States beat Slovakia 6-2. Lyon stopped 17 and 19 shots, it was, and then Trey Augustine went 5 for 5 in the shootout, which was cool. And then Nate Danielson continues to impress in the WHL playoffs. At one point, he was named Player of the Week, and Portland continued to roll on as they are now in the WHL finals. They're going to play the Moose Jaw Warriors starting Friday. So we're all Portland Winterhawks fans for the foreseeable future. Additionally, if they win, then they go to the Memorial Cup in Saginaw, and that's just more Nate Danielson content for you.
And we will be able to watch that nationally, which would be very clutch.
Yes. All right, let's jump into the draft lottery. Happened last night, the results of which were unsurprising for Red Wings fans and I guess everyone else, as it was a chalk result. Everyone got the spot that they were projected for based on the stats, which hasn't happened in a long time. But what happened before that caused some drama, Brad?
Oh, poor Bucci. Got all fired up for the draft lottery, decided to tweet out a picture of the set, which had some results on the board. Obviously, a test run, a practice run, rehearsal, whatever you want to call it. And would the NHL get out ahead of it? Not immediately. Of course they wouldn't. Why would they? Let everybody sweat for a bit. So everybody thought for a hot minute that San Jose had won the draft lottery and Utah had won the second spot. Welcome to the NHL, Utah. Here's the rug getting pulled out from under you day one.
Here's the thing. It was obviously a rehearsal. We've seen the results leak before. The NHL tries to be less bad at this year over year. Like, the whole process is audited by an external firm. I think it's Ernst & Young who does it. There's people in the room who, from each organization and media people, or there's an availability, I should say, for people from some organizations and the media people. So the NHL teams and the media, everyone who would have a vested interest in this being fair, they see the lottery balls get pulled and things like that. I understand the NHL's aversion to not wanting to show glitches, and that's why they haven't done it live in the past, because that will just make it look rigged. But at some point, all you're doing is fueling the fire when you have silly slip-ups like, hey, if you're in the room for the test run, phone's in this basket. Like, you're not... Please do not tweet. Like, the whole process needs to seem so above board. And I believe that it is above board. I don't think it's rigged. If it was rigged, Utah would have gotten second. Like, I think that's what the leak was, that Utah was second. That would have been the case, because that would have been great for Ryan Smith, and the Utah Yetis. But it's all above board. Why do you shoot yourselves in the foot? It's just such a silly distraction from the process, and it just fuels conversation that just makes the NHL look more amateurish.
Well, the Utah Mammoth need their disappointment immediately.
Mm-hmm.
they have it now. So we can welcome them to the NHL with full arms. They are true NHL fans now. And as for the actual draft lottery result, boring.
Well, here's the thing. It sucks to see Chicago get that second pick. They're going to take Demidov in all likelihood, and he's an insanely talented player. The only thing that would have been worse is them winning Celebrini. That would have been just gross. I will say for San Jose's sake, like that's a team, the story, the vibe, the projections for them is bleak. It is very, very bleak. And we said this on the podcast a few months ago, I think it was. You want a team to win it that doesn't affect the Red Wings. It's at a conference. San Jose is one of the safer bets to get Celebrini. I'm happy for the fans over there who've gone through a rough ride that they get at least something to look forward to. And it can help shake up the mix in the West a little bit too.
I'm still mad about Chicago getting second. I would have preferred Chicago 1 versus what happened.
Because that means they can't win in the future. Because I know you initially said, like, oh, Chicago won. But then we looked into it, and the rules are...
There's that little stipulation.
Yeah, with the new NHL lottery rules, you can only win the lottery so many times before you're not...
Twice in a 5-year span.
Yeah, and so if you win 2 times, then you're, like, in that 5-year span, you're not eligible to win until one of those wins expires, so to speak. Except the NHL doesn't consider it a win if you don't advance ahead of your presumptive position. So Chicago had the second best odds. They picked second, and thus they don't consider it a lottery win.
Yeah, they technically did win the second spot. The balls had to come out of the hopper in the order that gave Chicago the second pick. Like, just so we're clear on that. But like you said, because it didn't advance them, it's not a win. So now they could have this loophole where they win 3 lotteries in a 5-year span because of that little stipulation. So when James Haggins and Gavin McKenna, these next crop of generational talents who look like they're going to be better prospects than Macklin Celebrini are there, Chicago's still in the race because this system is stupid.
The official draft order as of now, before any trades or anything happens, San Jose first, Chicago second, Anaheim third, Columbus 4th, Montreal 5th, Utah 6th, Ottawa 7th, Seattle 8th, Calgary 9. Congratulations on T.J. Ginla. New Jersey 10th, Buffalo 11th, Philly 12th, Minnesota 13th, San Jose from Pittsburgh 14th, Detroit 15th, and St. Louis 16th. So Detroit holds that 15th overall pick. Unsurprising, they had a 0.5% chance. I actually think the 2 outcomes that would have been the funniest in very different ways. One is if Detroit won for the first time the year that they weren't eligible to get first overall, or 2, they actually moved down to 16th and St. Louis moved up 10 spots.
I'd have laughed so hard if they moved down to 16.
You don't wish for Detroit to have a worse draft position, but for the pure hilarity of it, the sick, twisted part of you almost would want to see how you would react, right?
100%. Plus, you know how much we do and every other Red Wings fan parades around how much the draft lottery sucks and how much we got screwed by it. Having that final nail of when we were 15th, we got bumped to 16th would have been the punchline to every joke we ever make about it.
Oh boy. Detroit's previous 2 15th overall picks. One that they traded for, Sebastian Cossa.
Great pick. Don't rehash the trade.
Especially not right now. Previous to that, a pick that they owned, Dylan Larkin. So don't pigeonhole yourself into thinking they're going to get a player who's not effective. Axel Sandin Pellikka came after the 15th overall pick. So please don't think that this is going to be a irrelevant player. Someone who I said might be a lot of Red Wings fans' most anticipated prospect was drafted later than 15th. So it's still going to be an important pick for the Red Wings.
Yeah, I'm with you. Anything less than a number 1 center or a franchise goalie is unacceptable. We'll accept a number 1 power play quarterback as well.
It'll be tough to see Celebrini fall that far. Like, that'll be a hard day for the kid, but I think Hockeytown will welcome him with open arms.
Yeah, I might have to trade up a couple spots to make it happen, but you won't have to give up much for that.
Yeah, you don't want to do any overkill.
Yeah, you don't make that trade until he gets to like 12 or 13.
All All right, we're not going to do a specific prospect profile today, but let's talk about players who are in range for that pick. And to prime this discussion, I'm going to first point to Bob McKenzie's draft rankings list. And know that this isn't Bob McKenzie saying these are who, in my opinion, are the 15 best players in order. This is based on his discussions with team execs, scouts, people who are involved in the player scouting process. So this is the most informed view you have onto what teams are thinking heading into the 2024 NHL draft. I think a lot of other people do a good job at this. Bob is, the preeminent. His list kind of dictates what a lot of people's thinking and understanding is. I think Corey Pronman has also hit the mark quite a few times too. So shout out to him for pulling that information together. But as of now, this is Bob McKenzie's draft ranking at the time of the draft lottery. Macklin Celebrini, Ivan Demidov, second. Silayev, third. Levshunov, fourth. Lidstrom, fifth. Sam Dickinson, sixth. Zane Perrick, seventh. Zeev Buyam, eighth. Konsta Helenius, 9th, TJ Ginla, 10th, Berkeley Catton, 11th, Carter Yakimchuk, 12th, Cole Eiserman, 13th, Beckett Seneke, 14th, and Trevor Connolly, 15th. And that's as far as his rankings went. So in terms of who you think could be in Detroit's range, who's there, and then who's standing out to you early on as some players you're more interested in?
Well, what I want to point out here is more a theme than anything else. You have this big run of defensemen, specifically big defensemen in the top 10, which, yeah, every team would love to have a Levshunov or a Dickinson, whatever. But what this is doing, and looking at this list, is it's pushing a lot of skilled forwards down. Berkeley Catton, Cole Eiserman, Beckett Seneke, Trevor Connolly, do with that information what you will, are all within 4 picks of Detroit by this ranking. And those are the exact type of players the Red Wings need. Again, everybody loves a good defenseman. Everybody loves a good goalie, whatever you want to go through. The Red Wings, in my opinion, above all else, need a highly skilled forward. One that's going to put points on the board. Berkeley Catton, check. Cole Eiserman, check. Beckett Seneke, check. Trevor Connolly, with baggage, check. This is... If the board plays out anything close to this, that is a massive, massive win for the Red Wings. And that doesn't even include guys like Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, who are outside of the top 15 here, who should absolutely be in play for Detroit at 15. Michael Haig, depending what you think about him and his short season. And, he's still a high skill forward. There's going to be lots and lots of options of what the Red Wings need most available to them at 15. And that is my biggest takeaway from Bob's list.
I agree with you that a high-end forward is the biggest need. I also want to say I'm very much of the mind right now that you can't overdo it on any position other than goalie for the Red Wings right now, and I don't think that's in play here. If they go with a defenseman, there's so many times I've seen teams, and not just in the NHL, across all major sports really, where you'll say, oh, that team is so loaded up on defensemen or this position, they add another premium one. And then you see the way it works out for them, and it's kind of like too much of a good thing. It's not really a thing often in the NHL. There's extreme examples. I mean, look at the Toronto Maple Leafs and what they have at forward, but that's an extreme example. But in general, I do agree, high-end forward. I still have a preference towards center. I believe in Nate Danielson in that he could be a true number 2 center in the NHL. Is it the only outcome for him? Nope. He might be more of a 2-3 guy. He might have to flip to wing. I believe Marco Kasper, Larkin, Danielson, Kasper, I believe that could be a good center depth punch down the middle. But you still see what makes successful NHL teams most of the time. And I still think centerman can do that. So if there's a player in here who can stick at center and still brings that high end offensive value, who can drive play at the NHL level, that's where I'm going to err towards, but I'm not stuck on that like I've been in years past. Wingers are much more amenable to me than what I think the Red Wings could take.
Berkeley Catton.
Yeah, that's...
You just described Berkeley Catton.
Yeah, that's like the dream. I would actually consider moving up for him.
Everybody always overdoes it with this small, aggressive center with a lot of skill is Braden Point. Berkeley Catton's probably as close as we've gotten.
Are you calling your shot, Brad? Because I get this question. We get this question every year. Who's the next Braden Point? Are you saying it?
I'm saying going into the draft, his profile has been the closest to anybody we've seen. Like, he put up, again, as a draft eligible player, 54 goals and 116 points in the dub this year. Like, crazy.
Yeah.
He's good. He's not getting to 15. I'd be shocked. But according to this, he's in trade-up range. If you were so inclined to do that. Now, my only argument against that is value is going to be slipping to 15 no matter what.
Yep.
So is it worth paying a premium to go up and get him? I'd absolutely hear the argument that it isn't, depending on how high you are on Berkeley Catton, but because he's probably the last center that I would consider at 15 of how this is likely to go. I don't think Hellenius gets that far. All the guys that are just outside of Bob's top 15 who are centers, I'm probably not in favor of, given who some of these wingers available are going to be.
Yeah.
But if Catton gets anywhere in range where you can make that happen, that's probably the ideal pick.
6'3" right-hand shot Carter Yakimchuk would be an automatic pick if he wasn't going to be selected before Detroit's range, right?
A right-hand defenseman who scored 30 goals in the dub this year? Yeah. Well, Bob's got him at 12. I'll be shocked if he gets that far.
I think that's too many GM's wet dream for him to go that far.
Yeah.
Which, and for good reason. I'm not slandering the kid. It'd be a great pick, but you talk about, okay, what are the Red Wings going to do if they add a defenseman? Let's talk about that. Like, there's going to be, if you look at Bob's list, and you refer to this, Brad, there might be a lot of high-end forwards pushed down because there's a run on defensemen. And that happens. A lot of NHL drafts, you don't really get too far before you see the premium defenseman go because teams would kill for a premium defenseman. When we talk about Mo Seider, other GMs would do anything for him, not because they think he's better than Cale Makar or better than this player or that player, but because he plays as their number one defenseman, and that is hard to find in the NHL. Detroit has a lot of holes, but number one defenseman isn't one of them. So teams are going to be trying to find that. So yeah, I agree in that a lot of high-end forwards could be pushed down, but what if Detroit takes one of those defensemen? Is it the end of the world? Is it a miss in your mind? And it's way too early to say that. I'm just kind of conjuring discussion here, but because I kind of think, yeah, you're walking away from some good offensive opportunities, but these are some really strong players here.
Is it a miss? Well, no, if the player pans out. You can always make trades down the line if you need to, if you end up with, too many cooks per se. That being said, if Yakimchuk pans out, if Sandin Pellikka pans out, we know what Mo Seider is. Are you going to be able to afford that right side of the defense? That's almost the Leafs core four, but in a different way. I still think the talent would be better spread out. Have strengths at every position. The Red Wings pipeline for wingers right now sucks. It's so bad. I understand the premium at center, and I'm always good taking a center because you can always move centers to wing if you end up with too many.
I fully agree.
You always can.
Yep.
But my God, do they need to do that, or do they need to draft some wingers? Because realistically, guys who are going to score in the NHL that are wingers in the Red Wings system right now, how many can you list with confidence are going to play in the NHL and actually produce?
You mean produce like everyday second line player?
Let's say 50 points is the bar.
Could you say that confidently about a single player?
I might be there on Carter Mazur, and that's it.
50 points.
50 points.
I think Carter has really kind of unappreciated offensive
We're
potential.
talking prime, not rookie year.
Okay.
I think 25-year-old Carter Mazur, as it stands right now, I would guess he's going to be hovering around 50 points.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. But beyond that,
that's it. That's the end of that list.
There's no Lucas Raymond in the...
Could Buchelnikov get there? Sure. I would still classify that as more unlikely than likely.
Yeah.
But it's in the cards.
There's just a big wall in the way between us, and this is my terrible puns for this episode. Carry on.
Jeez. Either way, when you're sitting here in this draft, and I think Bob's list is right, because there's going to be a huge run on defensemen, and you are looking at, again, I don't know which of these forwards are going to fall. I'll be shocked if T.J. Ginley gets past Calgary, but Catton, Eiserman, Seneke, Connolly, Brandsegg-Nygard, Michael Hegg, you are almost certainly guaranteed one of them there for you at 15. Man, you look at the state of your prospect pipeline. How do you not do that? One of Bouillon or Parekh or Yakimchuk, these like absolute can't miss defensemen would have to fall for me to consider. Like even if you look at a good defensive prospect like Adam Juracek, who's ranked outside of Bob's top 15, I don't think you can consider that. And I like him. But the need is so much greater at forward right now.
As I've been diving into prospects, and we've been laughing a lot off air because usually by this time of the year we are so tuned in. We've seen all the video, we have all the analysis, and by now we consider ourselves fully informed. We have to start this process months later than we typically do. But as I've been diving into it, tell me if I'm crazy for having this sentiment. I think Detroit at 15 has at least the same amount of really great opportunity in terms of who could potentially fall to them as they did at 9 last year.
Pretty close in terms of what they need and how this draft. This is just a fluke of being a defense heavy draft and Detroit being one of the few teams who's very well stocked at defense.
Yeah.
Right. I forget. It was Corey in his article pointed out that in the Athletics mock draft, there was a run of 6 defensemen in 9 picks before pick 15. And all the teams that in this mock picked defensemen, he agreed they had a need for defensemen. And he specifically said that probably means some highly skilled forward is dropping to Detroit at 15. That is such a unique circumstance. Beginning of the year. Okay. I want you to throw all context of everything out the window. I tell you, the Red Wings in back-to-back drafts with their first pick walked away with Nate Danielson and Cole Eiserman. Who are you more excited about?
Cole Eiserman.
Exactly. It's such a unique circumstance.
Yeah.
Cole Eiserman just broke Cole Caulfield's goal-scoring record at the USNTDP. Caulfield went 15th overall. How's that pick working out for Montreal?
The NHL's not going to let this happen again. You can't let that happen again if you're the NHL. I hope they do.
Size and defense always get priority. Always. This is assuming there are no reaches. Nobody reaches for a Juracek. Nobody reaches for a Hag. Nobody reaches for whoever. There's always reaches. What? Now, Detroit might be that team. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. We've seen it before.
Yes, but it worked.
It worked, but we've seen it before. But yeah, it's such a unique combination of team needs ahead of Detroit and it being weirdly heavy on defense.
What do I say every year? The risers closer to the draft tend to be more often than not defensemen. Because if you just look at it conceptually, it's less of a sexy thought to say, oh, with our top end first round pick, like our top 10 pick, we're going to take a defenseman. That's not really, you're not really adding goals. You're not really adding a lot of excitement to your team, but you see a lot of what makes strong NHL teams. They often try to, or at least historically try to build from the blue line out. Teams get wise to that. They see the opportunity to grab this 6 foot a million defenseman who's a very good defenseman still, but they're the ones who rise a lot later. Sometimes it turns into a really great situation where, Detroit drafts Mo Seider and it shocks a lot of people, but it worked because he was kind of a hidden gem. But a lot of times you see teams letting a really great offensive talent fall down the board. And I'm not saying offense is better to draft than defense. In case you guys didn't know, I used to be a defenseman. I'm big on defense. I think it's really underappreciated in terms of impact of the game, but I'm just saying that's the trend you tend to see closer to the draft in terms of consensus rankings. So we are going to be talking every episode leading up to the draft about these potential players.
You are right on that teams prioritize defense, and the way this draft is shaping up, that is definitely the way the winds are blowing.
I want everyone to know this is on the record. I'm going to end this episode in however many minutes, and I am going to immediately attack Brad.
Won't go well for you.
No, you're a father. We've been over this a million times. You have something to live for or nothing to lose, depending on how much money you spent on your kids' sports.
See, here's the unique thing about fatherhood. It's both at the same time.
I will never fight someone with pre-child Brad. Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's go all day. We'll see who wins. Now, I've seen Hank and Mika. Either one of them could take me. Anyhow, every episode leading up to the NHL draft, we're going to be talking not just about the prospects at the top of this draft, which I think is good for people to be informed of, but also the players who could be in Detroit's range in terms of likely to unlikely to make sure we have you covered. Okay, let's move this along here. The NHL playoffs. We are going to open first by talking about a team who we already discussed as out of the NHL playoffs, but the first half of the Toronto lost again media exit interviews happened. The exec and all of the general manager and everything basically from Tree Living up is happening Friday. They moved it from Thursday to Friday, but Keefe and the players spoke on Monday. And I got to tell you, it was the most Toronto-iest Toronto thing to ever happen. Mitch Marner was talking about, he was trying to refer to how much the fans revere the Leafs and how important the Leafs are to the city. The words that came out of his mouth were something to the effect of, the fans see us as gods in this city. You know what the guy meant. Of course you do. But Mitch, you gotta read a room, buddy. That was...
Mitch, you are objectively correct. Now is not the time.
I really do think they're trending in a direction. Obviously, coaching change is very, very likely.
Well, that's the thing, though, is nobody knew if Keefe was going to be at the press conference, whether he was going to be fired or not, and then he was. And then nobody knew if Shanahan was going to be at the Thursday management media, and then they delayed it for some unknown reason, and then they announced Shanahan would be part of it. Dude, they might come back with all these guys still in place next year. This team might literally run it back because they're just going to hurt itself in confusion.
There's limitations, right? Like if Marner exercises his no move clause and holds his spot, like, yeah, you understand that. But if they run it back with Shanahan and they run it back, I don't think they're running it back with Keefe. Like the writing was on the wall last year and they kept him. Are they really going to do that twice?
Yes, maybe.
Shanahan, I think is. I would also bet that they move on from him. I could see a situation where the new CEO of MLSE is like, yeah, I want to be here for a little longer before making a decision on that front, and gives him 1 year of runway. But I don't know, with all the reports coming out and a lot of inclination towards, Shanahan's going to be removed from that post and the post isn't going to be filled, and they're just going to go back directly towards a general manager reporting right into the CEO, which is effectively ownership situation. I just don't see them running it back again. I don't. I think everyone is just too fed up. I know you can look at things objectively and say, such and such was injured. Marner was playing with a high ankle sprain. Matthews missed games. Nylander missed games. Wall was injured for games. I know you can do that, but you've been doing that for how many years now? They can't run it back.
But they might. They're letting Keefe twist in the wind for a lot longer than they ethically should, if they are planning on removing him.
Yeah, yes.
With how many coaching vacancies are available right now, he's not going to get any of them. But if I was a coach who was about to be fired, I would like to apply.
There's a ton of vacancies.
Exactly. But they're already starting to get filled. And the longer they let him twist in the wind, the less likely is to get any of them.
I think they have to take care of the Shanahan situation first, understanding what they're going to do there before anything else.
Then why delay the press conference or media availability, whatever you want to call it, and then after the fact announce that he will be a part of it? Like, this is, as Red Wings fans, this is tremendous. As Leaf fans, this would be horrifying.
I don't think they feel anymore. I don't think they do. I think
they can't.
I think they have the same mentality as people who laugh, like the fans of rival teams who laugh at the Leafs. I think they're also laugh. It's the only way as a fan you can keep up with this. The Leafs are going to leave, and it's going to be funny for everyone. But let's move on to the rest of the playoffs. After last episode recorded, Dallas got the job done against Vegas. They won that game in 7. Wyatt Johnston continues to emerge as the hero in Dallas. And my immediate thought was, geez, you beat Vegas, a team that is however many millions of dollars over the cap, and you immediately get Colorado. And then in game 1 against Colorado, they're up 3-0. I'm like, oh, maybe this just goes to show how tough of a test Vegas was. Colorado wins 4-3 in overtime, coming back from a 3-goal deficit.
And nobody's surprised.
No, Colorado's just that good. Like, Dallas has to have probably as tight of a series that they had against Vegas to win this one now.
Except Colorado came into the series rested, and Dallas came in on 2 days rest. Well, technically only one off day in between. If Dallas wins the Stanley Cup, this is going to be the most impressive cup path of all time.
Vegas, Colorado, either Connor McDavid's Edmonton Oilers or the Vancouver Canucks, who knocked off Connor McDavid in the Edmonton Oilers, and then whatever juggernaut comes out of the East.
It'll be the most impressive cup run, maybe ever. Probably ever.
They have to get it done first.
Oh, yeah. I don't. They were my cup pick preseason, so I did not change it going into the playoffs because why would I? But man, I do not love their odds right now because of the 7-gamer against Vegas going up against a rested Colorado. It's not looking great.
I think goalies decide this. I think they do.
Well, Georgiev was bad in game 1, and they still won.
Made some key saves when it mattered.
Yeah, he also gave up what? Out of the 3 goals, 2 of them were
Yeah, you sticklers for details. Anyhow, Vancouver-Edmonton starts tonight.
Oh my God, this is going to be so unhinged. I love it. I know a majority of our listeners are American and they've heard all the memes and the jokes about Canadian hockey fans. You don't understand. I promise you do not understand what this is going to be like.
This is the closest thing that Canada has to college football in terms of like the religious importance to it.
Less people involved,
yeah,
but more obscenities hurled.
Somehow.
Yes. It's nuts. And like these aren't even like direct rivals like Calgary and Edmonton or Toronto and Montreal. And it's still going to get very close to that.
If the NHL ever has, and this won't happen, but if the NHL ever has like, let's say Edmonton, Calgary, Western Conference Final, Toronto, Montreal, Eastern Conference Final, and then, or even you can say Edmonton, Vancouver, Western Conference Final. And then it's like Vancouver, Toronto, Stanley Cup Final. The NHL will make more money than God and then immediately implode based off of the pure fury and blood that would pour out of those series.
The Great White North would be a tinge of gray due to all the smoke.
Yeah. And the nuclear winter that would ensue.
Yes.
Psychotic. Florida, Boston. Who predicted Boston coming out like that?
Nobody, which is why it happened. That's how hockey works.
Man, I really thought that Florida would have not cakewalked the series, but they would have had an easier test than they did with Tampa Bay. Not that I think Boston's a pushover. They're a really good team. And Toronto wasn't easy to beat, but Florida just looked like a force. But Boston won decisively in game 1.
Florida had an off night. I'm curious to see because my prediction is in game 2, they are going to make Boston's life very miserable. And if they don't, boy, our perception is going to change in a hurry.
Yep. Rangers, Carolina. Trocheck, the double overtime hero, scoring against Carolina to make that series 2-0, but a million shots on goal for Carolina. It doesn't feel like a series where they should be down 2-0, but they very quickly find themselves in a must-win in game 3 here.
I got a soft spot for the Rangers, and it's good for the NHL for the Rangers to go far. And I know the stats get a little inflated because Carolina's shot-heavy system, but yeah, this feels like it should be 1-1 right now. But
it's not.
But it's not. Score a goal. Get a scoring chance. Stop a puck. Playoff Freddie Anderson's back, baby.
I think their only hope would have been if Jacob Trouba like smashed his face and broke his nose off the glass, which I'm actually impressed that he didn't do.
He's not even a top 2 defenseman on the team. He may not be a top 3 defenseman on that team.
In terms of impact on the game, and I mean through all means necessary, he is. Impact. They probably had to be dented the boards, most likely.
He's like a number 3-4 defenseman, but he sure thinks he's Superman.
I can't stop laughing at that hit, man. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Okay, elsewhere in the NHL, Travis Green, formerly a Vancouver coach, was hired in Ottawa. The coaching carousel continues. Rick Bowness is retiring. There's a lot of vacancies, a lot of people moving around. Actually, very quickly in the Ottawa thing, the 4-year contract surprised me. I'm not going to say he is a bad coach because he didn't succeed in Vancouver. You've seen it time and time again. A coach who does bad in one place does great somewhere else and vice versa. Look at John Hines. And we've all been wrong before. 4 years, though, was surprising.
He's definitely one of the 35 NHL coaches that keeps getting recycled. That's about as strong of an opinion as I can have on Travis Green. And the 4 years, call that the Ottawa tax.
Berube is going to be in high demand. I'm actually surprised Toronto, you said about Keefe, like not making a move there sooner. I also surprised because I thought they might want to be in on Berube. Like the longer they leave him out there, like Ottawa didn't want him, that's fine, but New Jersey might want him. Other teams might want him. Winnipeg, you don't know who they're going to try to go for now that Bonus is retiring. There's a third of the league has a vacancy of some sort right now. So the big names are going to be in high demand. Elsewhere from the NHL and just kind of the postseason exit interviews, the LA Kings are running it back, so to speak, and that includes they had confirmation they're not interested in buying out Pierre-Luc Dubois, so they're going to try to turn things around with him. Okay, you laugh, but I just can't get over the fact it would have been so much money for so long.
1/3. It would have been 1/3. They have a very small window where it's not a 2/3 buyout. And by very small window, like we're literally talking days, if not hours. And once that window closes, it's like, yeah, you're not buying him out at 2/3 with that contract. Not until there's like 2 or 3 years left at best. They are making a hell of a bet that he's going to turn this around. And ever since that series against Toronto, has he given anybody any indication he gives a shit to turn it around?
No.
It's a hell of a bet to make.
No. Hart nominees: Nikita Kucherov, Nathan MacKinnon, Connor McDavid.
Objectively correct.
Unsurprising, but you leave off a shoe-in Vezina winner in Connor Hellebuck. You leave off a 69 goal scorer in Austin Matthews, not to mention a slew of other players who probably weren't deserving of being finalists, but were deserving of kind of, mention overall. I know Sidney Crosby, if the Penguins made the playoffs, you'd hear the chorus for him a lot higher. Some folks talk about Roman Josi, whatever, but it's those three guys. I think you're right. There's going to be losers and guys who are snubbed no matter what, but those are probably the top three. This is going to be an ugly fight when that vote gets released. The odds-on favorite to actually win, regardless of what we think, I think is Nathan MacKinnon.
He's due. And we know how that impacts award votes.
I can honestly see the discussion for all of them. And
there's a case to be made for all of them, but he's going to win because he's the only one that doesn't have one yet.
That's probably the most annoying thing and this isn't just the NHL. Like you look at NBA Defensive Player of the Year, one year they just got tired of giving it to the same guy.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone always has like he's due, he needs one more, this guy won it too much. Like what's going to happen is next year it's just going to go to McDavid again, and if he stays healthy. But that you talk about blood in the streets between fan bases, the Kucherov, McKinnon, McDavid feuds are going to be aplenty after the awards votes there. All right, let's move on. One quick note before we jump into overtime. Linked in the episode description and for the past few episodes has been the link to the Athletics local broadcast ratings survey that happens every year. Bally Sports Detroit, Ken Daniels, Mickey Redmond, that entire crew over there, they do such a phenomenal job. And, as we watch the playoffs progress, you hear some calls from other broadcasts, and then you move to national broadcasts. You really, you're not trying to put anyone else down, but you realize how lucky Red Wings fans are. So it's always great to celebrate that crew whenever we can. So if you have the time and you haven't already, go to the link in the description to vote and show your love for the Red Wings crew and pretty much any other crew across the league that you think deserves recognition. But I think the Red Wings have pound for pound the best local broadcast. I honestly, truly believe this in North American sports. Like we are so fortunate to have top to bottom such a great crew. So go give them a vote and show your love. Okay, let's jump into overtime. Overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast is proudly brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show and get access to benefits like the giveaways, the Discord, the bonus episodes, and lots more. Again, the Dub Club is the reason we can keep the show going in the off season and hopefully one day post bail for Evan, because that happens a few times a year. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. All right, let's take some questions from our patrons. Brandon Berg says, what are the skill set differences between an offensive forward and an offensive defenseman? I assume the different positions have different offensive responsibilities, but I never played hockey, so I don't know any specifics. Thanks, guys. You rock.
In terms of skills required, not a whole heck of a lot different. there are different types of offensive players, which muddies it up a bit, because for forwards, you have your snipers, your power forwards, your playmakers. Obviously, that's like a very broad brush. Whereas with defensemen, it's a little more pigeonholed in the sense that if you can't move the puck, you're not going to be an offensive juggernaut. So you at least have to have that playmaking gene, whereas a forward can get away without it.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's, you have to have vision. You have to have good puck skills. You have to be able to shoot. You got to be able to pass. There's a lot of crossover there.
I will say in terms of responsibility, and this may lead into like the skill set differences, I think you're much more able to be an offensive defenseman, or at least an effective one, if you can move really well with the puck. And I mean, like, you're moving laterally along the blue line, because a lot of being an offensive defenseman comes with distributing the puck. Sometimes on the power play, but not necessarily. But if you can walk the blue line, make a move, make a guy miss, that will feed into a lot of success offensively. You're hard pressed to be seen as an offensive defenseman if you can't do that. So that's a big part of it. Having a cannon of a slap shot, for example, is another big one where forwards don't necessarily need that. I think the slap shot is becoming less important across the league as time goes on and as snapshots improve, but still. So skating, I think, is in general a little bit more necessary for offensive defensemen than forwards. You forwards, you just cherry pick all day. You don't need to be able to skate well.
Correct.
Okay, the Dandy Man Can says, what do you guys think is in store for Bert and Mantha? I don't think Bert did enough to earn the contract he was looking for. Might even get less than his current AAV, and Mantha ended the year scratched, which can't have been good for his value. Yeah, it was a big flash in the pan and then a kind of a sputter end for Mantha, but both of them are in precarious positions.
Mantha's probably getting a short-term contract somewhere on a prove-it deal. Bertuzzi, man, he's got to sign for some term eventually.
Yeah,
you would think. I really don't know what his plan is going to be. He's almost 30, man. He's got to cash out at some point.
I wouldn't be surprised if this was his last bet on himself to try to raise that AAV until he takes, a hit on the AAV just to kind of get that term. I know he likes it in Toronto, but what can they afford and what will they give him? He was good at points and disappointing at points. And I think altogether there is a fit for him on that team. There's a fit for him on most teams, especially come playoff time, but he's not going to get, a 7x7, for example. I'd be shocked to see that.
Yeah, no chance. He might have to accept a 5x5 at best.
The cap going up kind of will have to, the frame shift of how we value contracts is going to change over the next few years. So, there's some movement there, but he's also not playing for the best team cap-wise, or at least just finished playing with them, for him to have that option internally. The Stanley Cup is a hyper trophy. Says, if you had to pick one option, is the young talent in our pipeline or free agent signings in the future going to be what takes this team to the next level? Oh, it has to be the young talent.
If it's not, you blow it up and start again, because you can't build through free agency. You just can't.
You can build a year.
You can supplement.
Yeah.
You can fill out the holes, but you don't get value in free agency in terms of contracts. So you can't be good without a couple good ELCs, good value contracts on your rosters. So yeah, if this core can't get them into the playoffs, and then trades in free agency can't land them a couple superstars to put them over the top, then there is no path forward here. You start over in 5 to 10 years, whatever it ends up being.
Listening to Ryan Hanna in the shower says, Max Bultman picked center Consta Hellenius for Detroit in the Athletics mock draft. He had 36 points in 51 Liga games and was over a point per game in the World Juniors. I've been pretty high on him so far. Have you guys had a chance to check him out yet? Stay fresh, cheese bags.
Initially, haven't done a deep dive on him yet. I like him. I'm not blown away by him. Well-rounded center, middle of the first round. Feels good. I'd be okay with that.
He's one of the good options in my mind. I also don't think he gets there though.
Yeah, I don't think he falls that far either, but I also have questions about what's his supreme skill that is going to separate him in the NHL. Smart player, well-rounded, but is he Anton Lundell? Is he Marco Kasper? Is he something less than that? Is he something more than that? I genuinely don't know.
Jeremy Dahl says, with how this draft class has played out and how much trouble Bowen Byram has had with injuries, should we be glad that we picked at 6 and got Seider instead? Yeah, you can't have, and this is coming from people who originally did have complaints, you can't have complaints about how that draft played out anymore.
Yeah, he'd go second overall. So short of winning the lottery, he's your best bet.
Simple as that. Like, this is why you don't beat yourself up too much about the lack of lottery wins, because the years where it would have mattered, well, okay, you took Lafreniere instead of Raymond. Are you better off? Who can make that argument right now? Last one here from Udalali says, so Bedard will win the Calder this year. He said Nate Danielson was one of the toughest players he played against. So obviously Nate will make the team next year and win the Calder for 2025. This will begin a 2-decade friendship feud for most hardware and cups between these guys. The obvious question is, who wins a cup first, Bedard or Danielson?
Given where Chicago is, it better be Danielson or someone screwed up.
Yes. But also Demidov is likely going to be at Chicago at some point. So that's going to be, I am now hoping that he is not as talented as he is projected to potentially be.
I'm betting they take a defenseman.
You think so?
Yep.
Do you think they move the pick?
Nope.
You think they just flat out take a defenseman?
Yep.
I don't know, man. You have a chance to stack yourself offensively with two talents like that.
Name one prospect in that system that plays defense. I don't even say a good one. Name one.
Korchinski.
He's on the team, not a prospect.
Oh, okay.
Name one.
Well, okay, but
I rest my case.
I don't know, man.
I like Demidov. I'd take Demidov too, but I don't think they're going to.
It'll get people out to games, and you're going to suck for a while.
You already have Bedard for that.
But yeah, okay. I see it. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying, like, it's. Are you really going to do Michkov again? You're going to do the whole thing over again?
Probably. They did it last year.
Yeah, what a best indicator of future events is. Yeah. All that. Okay, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast and head into our Patreon exclusive overtime. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. It's a little bit of a piecework episode with a lot of different storylines, but we appreciate you kind of transitioning to the offseason mode with us. We're really excited to ramp up for the NHL draft. Also, one day getting Evan back from being stranded on a desert island or wherever he is. But for now, thank you all so much for tuning into the Winged Wheel Podcast. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show. And if you're a listener of old, appreciate you hanging in with us for all these years. If you want to support us, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. And if Patreon's not for you, other ways you can support us, leave a rating wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, do the little thumbs up thing and subscribe wherever you get your pods, and tell a friend about the show. Thank you to Labatt Blue Light for sponsoring this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, and thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. We could not do it without you, especially our name level supporters on Patreon. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Akefer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Brad's Lord and Savior Bradley Cleveland, Victor Zetterberg, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Keenan O'Donohue, Yanni Burgers, Meals on Wheels, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Avery Sloppy Seconds, Beep, Carl Bertin and Anna Lusky, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Naney, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Seider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, God Creatives, Give Blood, Fight Probert, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, brand new name level supporter. Welcome to the Dub Club, Jeff. Joel Miranda, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Ryan 50, Hannah Hannah, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Scree and Lube, Stoli 70, Wingnut, That's What I Appreciates About You, Utah, Stormin Mormons, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Eiserman Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.B., Adam Rose, Axel Sandin Pellikka, Bellingham Acid Balls, Brad Simmons, Chi-Town Wings Fan, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarpless Goon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Layton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes, Dirty Deke, Eric Nance, Evans Fourth Putt, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, J.M. Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Ingalls, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Known Petrie Truther the Mexinadian, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Michigan Boy Navs Country, Punchable Face, Ophelia, Red Wing Tar Heel, Reed, Salt Lake Sugar Girlie, Sean Mason, Steven, The Hodag, The Stanley Cup is a Hyper Trophy, The Hat 123, Tom Eiserplan Respecter, Throw the Road Puss, Wings Fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you Sunday.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.